Sheriff saved a pregnant stranger from mob. The judge said he had to marry her or let her hang. Chapter 1. The Mob. The scorching August sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Deadwood Creek, Arizona Territory, as Sheriff Eli Turner made his afternoon rounds. The town was restless, simmering with the kind of tension that came from too much heat, too little rain, and far too many desperate men with nothing to lose. At 29, Eli had seen enough violence to last several lifetimes, but something about today felt different, dangerous in a way that made his hand rest instinctively on his gun. The commotion started near Murphy's Saloon, where angry voices were rising above the usual din of gambling and drinking. Eli quickened his pace, his boots echoing on the wooden sidewalk as the crowd grew louder and more agitated. "String her up," someone shouted. "Thieving whore got what she deserved." "Make an example of her," called another voice. "Show these drifters they can't come into our town and steal from decent folks." Eli pushed through the gathering crowd, his badge catching the afternoon sunlight as men reluctantly stepped aside. What he saw in the center of the mob made his blood run cold. A young woman, probably no more than 22 or 23, knelt in the dirt with her hands bound behind her back. She was clearly pregnant, maybe 6 or 7 months along, and her dark hair hung in tangled strand around a face that was pale with terror despite the desert heat. Her simple cotton dress was torn and dirty, suggesting she had been roughly handled, and there was a cut on her lip that was bleeding freely. But it was her eyes that struck Eli most forcefully, large, blue-green eyes that darted frantically between the hostile faces surrounding her, searching desperately for any sign of mercy or help. She was trying to be brave, but he could see the fear radiating from her like heat waves off the desert floor. "What's going on here?" Eli demanded, his voice cutting through the noise with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Caught this little thief red-handed, Sheriff," called out Jake Morrison, the blacksmith, his face flushed red with anger and whiskey. "She was stealing food from Henderson's store, bold as brass." "That right, Henderson?" Eli asked, looking toward the store owner, a thin, nervous man who was wringing his hands anxiously. "Well, Sheriff, I did find her with some bread and preserves she hadn't paid for," Henderson admitted reluctantly. "But I'm not sure she was actually. Course she was stealing." Morrison interrupted. "What else would a pregnant drifter be doing with unpaid goods? Probably planning to eat our food and move on without paying a cent." Eli studied the woman more carefully. She was thin despite her pregnancy, with the hollow-cheeked look of someone who hadn't been eating regularly. Her clothes, while clean, were patched and mended in several places. Everything about her spoke of genuine desperation rather than criminal intent. "Ma'am," Eli said gently, crouching down so he could speak to her at eye level. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the muttering of the crowd. "Sarah Williams." "Sarah Williams," Eli repeated, noting the slight hesitation before she gave her last name. "Where are you from, Mrs. Williams?" "Kansas, originally," she said, wincing as she shifted position. "But I've been traveling west. Looking for work." "Looking for work in her condition?" scoffed Morrison. "That's rich. What kind of work can a pregnant woman do except cause trouble?" Eli ignored Morrison's crude comment and focused on Sarah. "Mrs. Williams, did you take food from Henderson's store without paying?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Yes, sir, I did. I was so hungry, and the baby—" She placed a protective hand over her swollen belly. "I haven't eaten in 2 days. I was going to find work and pay him back. I swear it." "There, you heard it," Morrison shouted triumphantly. Confession straight from her own mouth. "Now let's get that rope." "Hold on just a minute," Eli said, standing and facing the crowd with his hand resting prominently on his gun. "But since when do we hang pregnant women for stealing bread in this town?" "Since they started showing up and taking what don't belong to them," called out another voice from the back of the crowd. "She's probably lying about being married anyway," added someone else. "Look at her. No ring, no husband, traveling alone. She's nothing but a—" "Careful," Eli warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that made several men in the crowd step back nervously. "You're talking about a woman who's carrying a child. I'd suggest you mind your language." But the crowd was beyond reason, worked up by heat and alcohol and the kind of mob mentality that turned ordinary men into something ugly and dangerous. Eli could see it in their faces. They wanted blood, wanted to make an example of this helpless woman who represented everything they feared and resented about the changing frontier. "Sheriff," came a new voice from the edge of the crowd. "Step aside and let justice take its course." Eli turned to see Judge Cornelius Blackwood approaching, his black robes incongruous in the blazing heat, his pale eyes cold as winter sky. Blackwood was a harsh man who believed in swift justice and severe punishments, and Eli could see the satisfaction in his expression as he surveyed the scene. "Judge Blackwood," Eli said carefully, "I was just." "You were interfering with the administration of justice," Blackwood interrupted. "This woman has confessed to theft. The penalty for theft in this territory is quite clear. For bread and preserves?" Eli protested. "Judge, she's pregnant and starving. Surely there are mitigating circumstances." "The law makes no exceptions for pregnancy or hunger," Blackwood replied coldly. "If we start making excuses for criminals, where does it end?" "No, Sheriff Turner, justice must be served." Sarah let out a small sob of terror, and Eli felt something fierce and protective surge in his chest. He looked at this young woman who was about to be murdered for the crime of trying to feed herself and her unborn child, and he knew he couldn't let it happen. "I'm taking her into custody," Eli announced firmly. "She'll have a proper trial, with a lawyer and everything according to territorial law." "A trial?" Blackwood's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Sheriff, she's already confessed. What more evidence do you need?" "Due process," Eli replied. "Even accused thieves are entitled to that much." The crowd began to mutter angrily, sensing that their entertainment was being denied them. Morrison pushed forward aggressively. "Sheriff, you can't just." "I can and I will," Eli said, drawing his gun in one smooth motion. "Anyone who wants to argue with me about it is welcome to try. But I promise you, the next person who lays a hand on this woman will be eating lead." For a tense moment, the crowd wavered. They outnumbered Eli significantly, but they also knew his reputation as a gunfighter. He had served in the cavalry during the war and had been keeping the peace in frontier towns ever since. Few men were willing to test his resolve. Judge Blackwood stepped forward, his expression calculating. "Sheriff Turner, you're making a mistake. But very well, take her into custody. But I warn you, the trial will be held tomorrow morning, and I very much doubt the outcome will be different than what would happen here today." Eli holstered his gun and moved to help Sarah to her feet. She was trembling so violently she could barely stand, and he had to support most of her weight as they made their way through the reluctantly parting crowd. "Thank you," she whispered as they walked toward the jail. I thought they were going to." "You're safe now," Eli said quietly, though he wasn't sure how true that was. Judge Blackwood was right about one thing. Territorial law was harsh, and theft was punishable by death. Sarah Williams might have escaped the mob, but she still faced the hangman's noose in the morning. As they reached the jail, Eli realized he had just bought this mysterious pregnant woman perhaps 12 hours of life. Tomorrow, unless he could find some way to save her, she would hang anyway, along with her unborn child. Looking down at her pale, frightened face, Eli made a silent promise. Somehow, he would find a way to keep her alive. He just had to figure out how. Chapter 2: The Ultimatum. The jail cell in Deadwood Creek was small and stifling, with iron bars that cast long shadows across the stone floor in the flickering lamplight. Sarah sat on the narrow cot, her hands resting protectively over her swollen belly, while Eli brought her a plate of food and a cup of water. "Eat," he said gently, setting the meal on the small table beside her cot. "You need to keep your strength up." Sarah looked at the food, simple fare of beans, bread, and bacon, but her eyes filled with tears. "This is more than I've seen in days," she whispered. "Why are you being kind to me?" Eli pulled up a chair outside her cell, studying her face in the dim light. Because you're a human being in trouble, and that's reason enough. Now eat, and then I need you to tell me the truth about who you are and how you ended up here." As Sarah began eating with the desperate hunger of someone who had been starving, Eli noticed details he had missed in the chaos of the mob scene. Her hands, though dirty, were soft, not the calloused hands of a woman who had done hard labor all her life. Her speech, when she wasn't terrified, carried the educated cadence of someone who had received proper schooling. Everything about her suggested she had once lived a very different life than the desperate circumstances that had brought her to Deadwood Creek. "My real name is Sarah Whitmore," she said finally, setting down the empty plate. "I lied about Williams. I had to." "Why?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Because my husband is looking for me, and if he finds me, he'll kill me and take the baby." Eli felt his jaw tighten. "He's the father?" "Yes, Charles Whitmore. He's a wealthy man back in Kansas, owns cattle ranches, has political connections. When I married him, I thought I was lucky. He was handsome, charming, seemed to care about me." Sarah's voice grew bitter. "I was 17 and foolish. I didn't see the monster underneath until it was too late. He hurt you. He nearly killed me twice. The first time, I was pregnant with our first child. He came home drunk and angry about some business deal. When I tried to calm him down, she touched her ribs unconsciously. I lost the baby that night." Eli's hands clenched into fists. "And you stayed with him? Where could I go? He controlled everything. My money, my friends, even my family believed his lies about me being delicate and prone to accidents. When I got pregnant again, I knew I had to run or he would kill this baby too. So you left. 3 months ago, I took what little jewelry I could hide and sold it piece by piece to survive the journey west. I was hoping to reach California, maybe find work as a governess or teacher." Sarah's voice broke slightly. "But the money ran out, and I got desperate." Eli leaned forward, his voice gentle but urgent. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. Judge Blackwood is not a merciful man. Unless we can find some legal technicality or mitigating circumstance, he's going to sentence you to hang tomorrow morning." Sarah's face went white. "Even though I'm pregnant, territorial law doesn't make exceptions. I'm sorry, but that's the reality we're facing." For a moment, Sarah seemed to crumple in on herself, overwhelmed by despair. Then she straightened, her hand moving to her belly again. "Sheriff Turner, if something happens to me, will you make sure the baby is cared for? There might be enough time to save." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Eli said firmly, though he had no idea how he was going to make that promise come true. "I'm going to find a way." Heavy footsteps in the hallway announced a visitor. Judge Blackwood appeared outside the cell, his pale eyes taking in the scene with cold satisfaction. "Sheriff Turner," Blackwood said, "I trust you've had time to question the prisoner about her crimes." "She's told me everything, Judge. She's a woman fleeing an abusive husband, trying to survive and protect her unborn child. Surely that warrants some consideration." Blackwood's expression didn't change. "Sob stories don't alter the facts, Sheriff. She stole property belonging to a citizen of this territory. The law is clear on the penalty for such crimes. She took bread and preserves because she was starving. Irrelevant. The law makes no distinction between theft motivated by greed and theft motivated by hunger. Both are crimes against property and the social order." Eli stood up, his frustration boiling over. "Judge, you can't seriously intend to hang a pregnant woman for stealing food worth maybe 50 cents. "I can and I will," Blackwood replied coldly. "Unless—" The way he said the word made Eli's blood run cold. "Unless what?" "Unless you're willing to take responsibility for her future behavior. Territorial law does provide one alternative to execution for female criminals." "What alternative?" Blackwood's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "Marriage, Sheriff. If a man of good standing in the community agrees to marry a female criminal and accept legal responsibility for her actions, the court may commute her sentence to the custody of her husband." Eli stared at the judge, certain he had misheard. "You're suggesting I marry her?" I'm offering you the only legal means of saving her life. Marry Mrs. Whitmore, did you say? Take legal custody of her as your wife, and she lives. Refuse, and she hangs at dawn along with her child. Sarah had gone completely still, her eyes wide with shock as she listened to her fate being decided by two men she barely knew. This is insane, Eli said. You can't force someone into marriage. I'm not forcing anything, Sheriff. I'm simply presenting you with choices. The woman dies, or she becomes your legal responsibility through marriage. The decision is entirely yours. Eli looked at Sarah, seeing the desperate hope in her eyes, warring with the knowledge that she was about to become a burden to a stranger. She had already been trapped in one marriage to a man who had hurt her. Now her only escape from death was another marriage to someone she didn't know. How long do I have to decide? Eli asked. Court convenes at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you haven't agreed to the marriage by then, the execution will proceed immediately after sentencing. After Judge Blackwood left, Eli and Sarah sat in heavy silence, both processing the impossible choice they had been given. You don't have to do this, Sarah said finally. I won't blame you if you choose to if you can't. Don't, Eli said sharply. Don't even think about it. I'm not going to let you die, Sarah, not if there's any way to prevent it. But marriage? Sheriff, you don't know anything about me. I could be lying about everything. I could be exactly the kind of woman this town thinks I am. Eli studied her face in the lamplight, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances, the protective way she cradled her unborn child. Are you? He asked quietly. No, she said firmly. Everything I told you about Charles, about why I ran, it's all true. Then that's all I need to know. Eli stood and paced to the window, looking out at the dark street where just hours before a mob had been baying for this woman's blood. Marriage to a stranger was hardly ideal, but it was better than death. And if it saved two innocent lives. If I agree to this, he said, turning back to face her. What happens after? Do you stay here? Do you want to stay? Sarah considered the question seriously. I don't know. I never expected to have choices again. But Sheriff, Eli, if you do this for me, I promise I'll try to be a good wife to you. I know this isn't what either of us wanted, but I'll do my best to make it work. And if your husband finds you, if he comes looking, Sarah's expression hardened. Then we'll face that when it happens. But I won't let him hurt my child, and I won't let him hurt you for helping me. Eli made his decision. Then I guess we're getting married in the morning. As he prepared to leave her for the night, Sarah called out softly, Eli, thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet, Eli replied. Ask me again in a year if I made the right choice. But as he walked home through the dark streets of Deadwood Creek, Eli realized he had already made his peace with the decision. Tomorrow he would marry a woman he barely knew to save her life. It might be crazy, but it felt right. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important decisions were the ones that seemed impossible at the time. The courthouse of Deadwood Creek was packed with curious onlookers when Judge Blackwood called the court to session at 8 o'clock sharp. Word had spread through town that Sheriff Turner was marrying the pregnant thief to save her from hanging, and half the population had shown up to witness the spectacle. Sarah stood beside Eli, wearing the same torn dress from yesterday, but with her hair cleaned and braided by the jailkeeper's wife. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a small bouquet of wildflowers that someone had thoughtfully provided. This is highly irregular, Judge Blackwood announced to the court, though his tone suggested he was enjoying the drama. But territorial law does provide for marriage as an alternative to execution in cases involving female criminals. Eli felt Sarah's tension beside him. She had barely slept, and the dark circles under her eyes spoke of exhaustion and fear. But she stood straight, facing their uncertain future with courage. Sheriff Turner, Blackwood continued, do you voluntarily agree to marry this woman and accept full legal responsibility for her actions going forward? I do, Eli replied firmly, his voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. And you, Sarah Whitmore, do you agree to this marriage? Yes, Sarah whispered, then cleared her throat and spoke louder. Yes, I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife. Sheriff Turner, You may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief and awkward, more symbolic than passionate, but Eli felt something stir in his chest as Sarah's lips touched his, a protective tenderness that surprised him with its intensity. "Court is adjourned," Blackwood declared. "Mrs. Turner, your sentence is hereby commuted to the custody of your husband." As they left the courthouse, the crowd's reaction was mixed. Some offered congratulations, others muttered disapprovingly about sheriffs who married criminals. But Sarah was alive, and that was all that mattered to Eli. "What now?" Sarah asked as they walked toward his small house at the edge of town. "Now we figure out how to be married," Eli replied, realizing he had no idea what that meant under these circumstances. 3 weeks into their marriage, Eli and Sarah had settled into a cautious routine that felt more like friendly roommates than husband and wife. Sarah had taken over cooking and cleaning with quiet efficiency, while Eli continued his duties as sheriff, both of them carefully polite around each other. Sarah's pregnancy was progressing, and she moved with the careful grace of a woman carrying precious cargo. Eli had given her the bedroom while he slept on a cot in the main room, maintaining the respectful distance they had both seemed to need. "Eli," Sarah said one evening as they shared dinner, "I've been thinking about what happens when the baby comes." "What do you mean?" "I mean, will you claim the child as yours? Or—" She paused, struggling with the words. "People are already talking about the timing." Eli set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "Sarah, that baby will be my child in every way that matters. I don't care what people say." Tears filled her eyes. "You would do that? Accept another man's child as your own? I married you to save your life and the baby's life. That makes us family." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Eli opened it to find a well-dressed stranger with cold eyes and an expensive gun at his hip. "Sheriff Turner? I'm looking for my wife, Sarah Whitmore. I believe you might know where to find her." Eli's blood turned to ice. Charles Whitmore had found them. "I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that name," Eli replied calmly, his hand moving toward his gun. Charles smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. "Really? Because I have it on good authority that you recently married a pregnant woman matching my wife's description. I'll come and take her home." Behind Eli, Sarah had gone completely still, her face white with terror. "My wife's name is Sarah Turner," Eli said firmly, "and she's not going anywhere." "We'll see about that, Sheriff. We'll see about that."